Ethan Carver sat alone in his small apartment, the dim glow of his laptop screen cutting through the quiet of the night. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating as he stared at the new email from his Uncle Greg. Usually, emails from Greg were casual, full of jokes or updates about the family, nothing serious. But tonight, something about the subject line felt different. There was an urgency, a weight that made Ethan's stomach tighten. After a long moment of hesitation, he clicked the attachment. The screen flickered, and the video began. Ethan's heart froze the moment he recognized his mother's voice. Linda Carver, the woman who had raised him, who had smiled at him every morning and tucked him in every night, was laughing in a way that made his stomach turn. She called him a cash cow, her words dripping with amusement as if the years he had spent supporting her had been nothing more than a source of endless profit for her. Ethan's mind reeled. He had spent years working overtime, saving every extra dollar to make sure her mortgage was paid, to keep the house she insisted on living in. Every sacrifice, every long hour, every skipped meal had been for her, and now he realized she had never truly appreciated a single thing. He pressed pause on the video, gripping the edge of the desk so tightly his knuckles whitened. The laughter echoed in his head, the words repeating themselves in a loop that made his chest ache. He felt a cold, hollow rage rising in him, but beneath it was something heavier, something that left him feeling smaller, weaker, and entirely betrayed. How could someone who claimed to love him so much see him only as a source of money? How could the woman who had taught him about kindness and generosity be capable of such cruelty? Ethan sank back in his chair, his mind racing through memories he had always cherished. The birthdays he had celebrated for her, the countless dinners he had skipped so he could send her extra money, the endless nights spent worrying about how to make ends meet while still covering her bills, all of it suddenly felt tainted. Every act of care he had given had been repaid with mockery behind his back. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, and he found himself struggling to breathe. He felt like the ground beneath him had shifted, leaving him off balance in a world he had thought was safe. He tried to understand, to reason it away, but the laughter, the cruel words, and the betrayal lingered like smoke in his lungs. Ethan felt hollow, as if the part of him that had trusted and loved without question had been ripped away. Tears prickled at the corners of his eyes, not for the money lost, but for the mother he had believed in, the mother who had never truly been who he thought she was. The room felt smaller, suffocating, and for the first time in his life, he felt completely alone. He closed the laptop slowly, but the image of her face, smiling and laughing at his expense, stayed burned in his mind. Betrayal had a sharp taste, and Ethan felt it deep in his chest. For a long time, he just sat there, staring into the darkness, trying to process the truth he had never wanted to see. The woman who was supposed to love him had only ever seen him as a source of money. And in that moment, the world he had known shifted forever. Ethan Carver had always been the kind of man who believed hard work could fix anything. In his late 20s, he lived simply in a small apartment on the edge of town, his days spent working long shifts at a construction company and his nights filled with bills, lists, and quiet determination. He didn't have much, but he had a strong sense of responsibility, especially toward his family. His mother, Linda, had raised him alone after his father left, and Ethan had grown up believing he owed her everything. From the moment he started earning a steady paycheck, most of his money went to her. When the house mortgage fell behind, Ethan took out a personal loan to save it. When the roof leaked, he used his savings to fix it. If she hinted at needing something, he found a way to get it for her. He never complained. He told himself she deserved it after all she had done for him. The truth was, Ethan had built his life around keeping his mother comfortable, even when it meant going without himself. Linda Carver had a way of charming people. To neighbors and friends, she was the kind of woman who always had a kind word and a sweet smile. People loved her easy laughter and her way of making everyone feel important. But behind closed doors, Ethan often saw another side of her, sharper, colder. When she was upset, her words cut deep. She could twist a moment of kindness into guilt if it didn't serve her needs. Still, Ethan convinced himself that she was just stressed, that life had made her this way. He wanted to believe the best in her, even when the truth was hard to ignore. Uncle Greg, his mother's older brother, was one of the few who seemed to notice how one-sided things were. He never said much, but his silence carried weight. Every time Ethan mentioned another payment or expense for the house, Greg would sigh quietly or shake his head. "You've got a good heart, kid," he would say once in a while. "Just don't let people use it up." Ethan would brush it off, not wanting to believe his uncle was hinting at something darker. There had been small moments over the years when Ethan caught glimpses of his mother's greed, but he never named it for what it was. Like the Christmas he surprised her with a new television after saving for months, and she only frowned, saying it wasn't the model she wanted. Or the time he offered to take her on a small weekend trip, and she dismissed it as too cheap compared to what her friends did. Those comments stung, but he swallowed the hurt, convincing himself she didn't mean them. Every decision Ethan made revolved around his mother's happiness. He worked overtime when his body ached, skipped meals when money was tight, and avoided dating because he didn't want distractions. His friends teased him for being too responsible, but Ethan just smiled and said family came first. He didn't see how deeply his loyalty was costing him, or how much it was feeding something selfish inside Linda that would one day come back to destroy the bond he thought they shared. After watching that video, Ethan couldn't stop his mind from replaying old moments that now felt different. Things that once seemed small started to make sense in a painful new way. There were times when money had gone missing from his account, little withdrawals that he didn't remember making. Linda had always been quick with excuses back then. "Oh, I must have mixed up the dates when you sent me the money, honey. Don't worry about it." He had trusted her, brushing it off because she was his mother. But now, each of those moments burned in his memory like a warning he had ignored. He remembered the late-night phone calls too. He would stop by the house after work, tired but happy to see her, and she would be in the kitchen, whispering into her phone. When she saw him, she'd hang up quickly and smile too wide, acting like nothing was wrong. Once, he caught her arguing quietly about how much she deserved after everything she'd been through. At the time, he had assumed it was about an old friend or maybe a bill collector. Now he wasn't so sure. Ethan also started noticing the things she owned: the new gold bracelet, the upgraded kitchen appliances, the expensive perfume she wore when she said she was just staying home. He never questioned it before. He thought maybe she was finding small joys after years of struggle. But when he thought about how tight things had been financially, he realized she must have been spending more than she ever let on. He couldn't remember her thanking him for the sacrifices he made, only asking when the next payment would come. One weekend, Ethan decided to bring it up, careful not to sound accusing. They were sitting in her living room, the same one he had helped pay for. He asked gently, "Mom, have you been spending a lot lately? I just noticed a few things that don't quite add up." Linda looked at him over her coffee mug and laughed, a quick, dismissive sound that made him feel small. "Oh, Ethan, you worry too much," she said lightly. "You're so dramatic sometimes. I know how to manage a little money. Stop treating me like I don't." Her tone carried that familiar edge that always made him back down, but this time it hit differently. The laughter felt mocking, and the warmth he used to feel in her presence turned cold. For the rest of that day, Ethan couldn't shake the unease building in his chest. He tried to let it go, but his thoughts wouldn't quiet down. When he stopped by his uncle's house a few days later, Greg noticed the tension on his face. Over a cup of coffee, Ethan mentioned the strange things he'd been noticing. Greg listened without interrupting, his eyes thoughtful. When Ethan finished, Greg leaned back and said quietly, "You're too good to be true, kid. Don't let her take advantage of you." Ethan didn't know how to respond. He wanted to defend her, to argue that Greg didn't understand. But deep down, a part of him knew his uncle was right. The uneasiness he'd been feeling wasn't going away. The woman he had trusted more than anyone was starting to look like a stranger, and that realization scared him more than anything. Ethan couldn't stop himself from watching the video again. Each time he played it, the words hit harder. His mother's laughter, sharp and mocking, cut through the silence of his apartment. "Here's my little cash cow," she said, her tone playful, like she was proud of it. Every time he heard it, it felt like someone twisting a knife in his chest. He had heard that voice his whole life, comforting, warm, familiar. But now it carried something cruel that he had never noticed before. He paused the video and stared at her frozen face on the screen. The woman who had once hugged him when he was scared, who had told him to work hard and be kind, looked like a stranger. The memories started to rush in one after another. The years he worked 2 jobs to send her money when she said she might lose the house. The time he skipped paying his own college tuition for a semester just so she wouldn't fall behind on bills. The night he stayed up late, sorting through loan papers to make sure her mortgage was paid. Every sacrifice came back to him, not as love, but as proof of how easily she had used him. He thought about the birthday dinners she had smiled through while telling everyone how lucky she was to have a son like him. He remembered her hugs, her gentle words, You're my pride, Ethan. They had always made him feel like he was doing something good, something meaningful. Now he could see that every compliment, every thank you, had been another way to keep him close, to make sure he wouldn't stop giving. The realization made his stomach turn. He had built his whole sense of worth around helping her, and now that truth was gone. At first, the pain was overwhelming. His chest felt tight, his throat ached, and his hands shook as he tried to breathe. But as the hours passed, something else began to grow beneath the pain, a slow, burning anger. Not the kind that explodes all at once, but the kind that settles deep, steady, and cold. He realized that she had never seen him as her son. She had seen him as a way to live comfortably, to avoid her own struggles. The woman he had trusted most had taken advantage of the one thing he gave freely, his love. For a moment, he wanted to drive straight to her house, to confront her, to throw the truth in her face. He wanted her to see what she had done to him. But as the anger sharpened, he stopped himself. Storming in now would only end with her twisting things, turning herself into the victim, making him doubt himself again. He knew her too well. If he wanted to do this right, he couldn't act out of pure rage. He needed to think. He needed a plan, one that would show her what she had done, one that would make her feel the same helplessness he felt now. He shut the laptop and sat in the dark, his mind racing but his body still. For the first time, his thoughts weren't clouded by guilt or love. They were clear and sharp. He wouldn't let her destroy him again. If she wanted to see him as a cash cow, she was about to learn what happens when the well runs dry. Ethan moved quietly, like someone doing work that had to stay hidden until the right moment. He opened his online bank account and printed every statement that showed transfers to his mother. He dug through old emails for payment confirmations and downloaded copies of mortgage statements from the county website. He found receipts from repairs he had paid for and took photos of old text messages where he'd promised to cover costs. He made a folder on his laptop and a paper file he could carry, labeling everything by date so nothing would look like a jumble. He sat at his kitchen table at night, spread papers around him, and built a clear timeline. Each page told a simple truth: when he sent money, why he sent it, and what it paid for. He circled totals and added up months of payments until the numbers made sense on their own. Seeing it on paper made him calmer. The mess in his head straightened into facts he could use. Facts, he told himself, could not be argued away with charm or laughter. Ethan knew he needed someone to check his work. He called Clara and asked to meet at a coffee shop he trusted. Clara had been his friend since they were kids. She was steady, practical, and the kind of person who noticed small details. When he set the folder on the table between them, she didn't smile or gasp. She looked. Then she opened her own notebook and began asking the exact questions he had been afraid to answer. Where did each payment go? Could he prove it cleared the bank? Did any receipts match the mortgage account? They worked through the stack together. Clara helped him reorder documents so the story would read in a straight line. She suggested he make digital copies and back them up in 2 places. You don't want anything to disappear, she said. Her tone was firm, not angry. She warned him gently about how easy it is to let the need for retribution become the whole life. You get justice without losing yourself, she told him. Keep your job, keep your friends. This has to be smart, not just loud. Ethan liked that. He was tired of feeling like anger was the only thing moving inside him. He wanted control. Clara helped him sketch a plan that kept doors open instead of slamming them. First, assemble undeniable proof. Second, present it in a way that could not be shrugged off. Third, give Linda a chance to respond in private before dragging anyone else into it. He didn't want a public spectacle. He wanted a correction that protected him and forced honesty. They also talked about practical steps. Clara recommended he speak quietly to a legal aid clinic about the mortgage records he'd collected, just to know his rights. She offered to sit in on any meeting as moral support. When they left the coffee shop, Ethan felt steadier than he had in weeks. The files in his bag were no longer a burden. They were his plan. He had turned pain into work, and with Clara's steady voice beside him, the work felt less like revenge and more like reclaiming something that had been taken. Ethan started small, making moves Linda would barely notice. He called the loan company and updated his contact info so notices would come to him first. He set automatic transfers to a separate account he'd opened weeks earlier, an account for payments he was entitled to receive but had always let slide into the house's accounts. By routing money differently, he stopped the invisible flow that had kept her comfortable without oversight. He also began buying pieces of what they shared. When an elderly neighbor wanted to sell a lawnmower and a set of patio chairs that had always been used at Linda's house, Ethan paid cash and left them at his storage unit. He found affordable plots in a community auction, small things like a shed and a weekend away voucher, and quietly transferred titles into his name. These were not grand gestures. They were legal, careful steps that tightened his hold on assets he knew she valued. At night, he visited the county clerk's office to look over property records. He filed forms for co-ownership corrections where his name should have appeared, and he started informal paperwork to make his contributions visible on official record. He didn't yet change deeds or make loud filings, but he set up the legal groundwork a lawyer later could use. A single notarized page here, a certified copy there. Each small document reduced the room for her to deny his involvement. He was careful to keep the moves discreet. Whenever he transferred anything, he recorded the transaction and sent an encrypted copy to a secure email Clara helped him set up. She checked receipts and reminded him when deadlines approached. Their plan balanced stealth with solidity. Every quiet action had proof behind it. Linda noticed changes in the household. The bills arrived differently, letters were answered faster, and fewer discretionary purchases found their way into the house each month. She blamed stress at first, complaining to neighbors about headaches and paperwork. When Ethan politely declined to cover a new purchase she hinted she needed, she scoffed and asked where his sudden stinginess came from. He said little, only that he had other priorities. His calm made her restless. She began to ask questions she did not always expect answers for. Suspicion crept into her voice. She watched his movements more closely, commenting on small shifts like when he came home later or when he took calls outside. That attention suited him. He wanted her to feel the unease she had caused him for years. But he stayed measured, never accusing, only documenting. Each day the balance shifted a little more, and Ethan felt a steady satisfaction, like tightening a rope that would one day hold firm. Patiently, he moved through legal channels and quiet purchases, confident that each small, careful step would build the case that would force real, undeniable change soon. Ethan called his mother one afternoon and suggested a family dinner. He told her he wanted to clear the air and spend time together after what he called a rough few months. His voice was calm, almost warm, and Linda sounded surprised but pleased. She agreed quickly, eager to host and show off her usual charm. Ethan hung up the phone, his expression unreadable. The dinner wasn't about reconciliation, it was about truth, and he was ready. He invited Uncle Greg and Clara as well. He told Linda it would be nice to have everyone together again, just like old times. She seemed thrilled at the idea, not realizing that both Greg and Clara already knew the real purpose behind the evening. They would be there as quiet witnesses, ready to step in if things turned ugly. Ethan spent the week preparing, not just for the meal but for the moment he'd been planning for months. He reviewed every paper, every record, and every note he had kept. He wasn't going to argue or raise his voice. He wanted calm precision, something his mother couldn't twist or dismiss. When the evening arrived, the house smelled of roasted chicken and herbs, the kind of meal Linda always made when she wanted to impress. She greeted everyone with a wide smile, complimenting Clara's dress and joking with Greg about how rarely he came by. Ethan watched her carefully, noticing how easily she slipped into her public charm. It almost made him forget what she had said in that video, almost. Dinner started smoothly. The conversation was light, full of small talk and old stories. Ethan joined in just enough to keep things comfortable. Then, as plates began to empty, he leaned back in his chair and changed the tone. "You know," he said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about how families handle money. It's strange how something meant to help can sometimes make things confusing. I think being open about finances, being transparent, can really show who respects each other's efforts." The table went quiet. Linda's smile faltered for just a moment before she caught herself. "That's a thoughtful idea, sweetheart," she said, forcing a light laugh. "But we've always managed fine, haven't we?" Ethan nodded slowly. "We have. But I think it's also fair to make sure everyone's contributions are recognized, especially when people make sacrifices." His tone was even, but there was an edge under it. Greg looked down at his plate, hiding a small frown, while Clara watched Linda closely. Linda shifted in her seat. Her hands tightened around her glass. "Well, of course," she said quickly. "You've always been so generous. Everyone knows that." Her voice was a little too fast, her laugh too sharp. Ethan let the silence linger, watching her eyes flicker between him, Greg, and Clara. There was a hint of panic now, a realization that something deeper was happening. She tried to fill the space with chatter, but her words stumbled. The confidence she wore so easily began to slip. Ethan didn't push further that night. He wanted the tension to settle in, wanted her to sense that something was shifting beneath her control. When the dinner ended, he thanked her politely and hugged her goodnight. As he walked out with Greg and Clara, a quiet satisfaction grew in him. She didn't know what he had planned, but for the first time, she knew something was coming, and that knowledge alone was enough to shake her. A week after the dinner, Ethan asked his mother if he could stop by to go over some financial paperwork. She agreed without hesitation, probably thinking it was just another one of his responsible gestures. When he arrived, Uncle Greg was already there, sitting quietly in the living room. Clara had come too, carrying a folder in her hands. Linda seemed surprised to see everyone together again but smiled anyway, her tone light. "What's all this about?" she asked, laughing softly. "You three look like you're about to hold a meeting." Ethan didn't sit right away. He placed a thick folder on the table between them and met her eyes. "Actually, Mom, that's not far off. I wanted to talk about the house, the payments, the mortgage, everything I've been covering these past few years." Linda's smile faded a little. "Oh, sweetheart, there's no need for all that. You've been such a help, and I've always appreciated it." He didn't answer. He opened the folder and began laying out the documents one by one. Bank statements, mortgage receipts, loan summaries, all organized in neat order. "These are all the payments I've made," he said quietly. "Every month, every loan, every repair. I wanted you to see it all clearly." Linda blinked, her tone shifting from soft to defensive. "Ethan, why are you bringing this up now? You know I've always planned to pay you back someday. I just needed time." He nodded slowly. "I thought so too," he said. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small USB drive, and set it beside the papers. But this made me wonder if that was ever true. For a long second, she didn't move. Then Greg leaned forward and plugged the drive into the television. The video started playing, the same one Uncle Greg had sent Ethan weeks ago. Linda's laughter filled the room again, her voice mocking, her words clear as she called him a cash cow. The sound echoed through the silence. Linda's face drained of color. "Turn that off," she snapped, standing up quickly. Her voice trembled with panic. "That's taken out of context. Greg, how could you send him that?" Ethan didn't move. "It's not out of context, Mom. You laughed about the money I worked myself sick to earn. You used me." Her expression twisted, switching from panic to anger. "Used you? Don't be ridiculous. Everything I've done was for us. You wanted to help. I never forced you." Ethan's tone stayed calm. "You didn't have to force me. You just made me believe I was doing the right thing." She tried to cry then, her voice softening into the same guilt-laced tone that had always worked before. "Ethan, honey, I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just joking in that video. You know how people talk when they are tired. Don't throw away everything we've built over one mistake." But the words didn't land this time. He looked at her, his face steady, almost emotionless. "You already did that. You made me believe love meant giving until there was nothing left." Greg sat still, watching his sister crumble under the weight of her own lies. Clara remained silent, her eyes fixed on the scene unfolding. Linda's hands shook as she tried to gather the papers, but Ethan stopped her. "Don't," he said quietly. "Those are mine now. So is the house. The documents are already filed." For the first time, Linda had no words. She looked at him, a mixture of guilt and disbelief clouding her face. Ethan stood and took a slow breath. "I'm done being your safety net. You wanted me to be your provider, but I'm your son, not your paycheck." He turned to leave, his footsteps steady. Behind him, the house was silent except for his mother's uneven breathing. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was final. Ethan didn't raise his voice, didn't seek revenge through anger. The truth alone had been enough to destroy her lies. After that night, everything in Linda's life began to change. The calm confidence she had always carried was gone. Word spread quietly among the family that Ethan had finally stood up to her. No one knew all the details, but they knew enough to stop believing her old stories about being supported out of love. The truth about the money and the mortgage couldn't be hidden anymore. When relatives called, Linda tried to explain it away, saying it was a misunderstanding, but her voice always cracked, and people stopped answering her calls as often. The next month, the payments on the house no longer came from Ethan's account. The funds had been redirected, and the automatic transfers were gone. Linda called the bank in confusion and was told that her financial arrangements had been changed legally. She tried to reach Ethan, leaving long messages about how difficult things had become, but he didn't answer. She had to start using her own savings to keep up with the bills, and for the first time in years, she had to manage everything herself. Ethan, meanwhile, felt lighter. The weight that had sat on his chest for years was gone, replaced with quiet determination. He had filed everything properly, reclaiming his share of ownership in the house and securing documents that protected his rights. He didn't want revenge through destruction. He wanted balance. And he finally had it. He moved forward with a calm mind, paying his own debts, building his savings, and no longer feeling like someone else's lifeline. Uncle Greg stopped by his apartment a few weeks later with a bag of takeout and a grin that said more than words could. "You did it," he said, sitting down beside him. "Not just the paperwork, you got your life back." Ethan smiled faintly. "I guess I did." Greg nodded, his voice softer. "You gave her every chance, kid. Some people only learn when the well runs dry." Clara came over that weekend too. They sat on the porch and talked about simple things, work, the weather, the small joys of a quiet evening. She told him she was proud of how he handled it. "You didn't become her," she said. "You didn't let bitterness eat you up." Ethan appreciated that. He knew he was still healing, but hearing it from someone who had seen his lowest point meant something. Linda's pride took the hardest hit. Without Ethan's support, she had to face people who no longer saw her as the kind woman she pretended to be. She reached out to other family members for help, but most gave polite excuses. The sympathy she expected never came. The cracks in her relationships grew wider, and the charm she had used for years no longer worked. The laughter that once filled her house was replaced by silence and unpaid bills stacked on her table. Ethan didn't gloat or celebrate. There were no loud victories, just quiet relief and a touch of sadness that it had come to this. He still wished things could have been different, that his mother had chosen honesty over greed. But when he looked at how far he'd come, he knew he'd done the right thing. For the first time in his adult life, his money and his peace belonged entirely to him. Months passed, and life slowly began to feel normal again. Ethan worked his regular hours, paid his own bills, and spent his weekends doing small things that made him feel at peace. Reading on the porch, cooking simple meals, taking quiet walks at night. The chaos that had once filled his mind had faded into stillness. For the first time in years, he didn't wake up with anxiety about who needed something from him. The freedom was unfamiliar but good, like taking a deep breath after being underwater for too long. Sometimes, though, the quiet brought memories he didn't expect. He would think about his mother's laugh from when he was a kid, before money and control had turned it cold. He'd remember holidays when the house had felt warm, when he had believed that family meant safety. Those memories still hurt, but they didn't crush him anymore. They reminded him that he had once loved without fear, and that he could again, someday, with the right people. Ethan often replayed the journey in his mind. The heartbreak had felt unbearable at first, but now he could see what it had taught him. Betrayal had stripped him of the illusion that love and sacrifice always went hand in hand. Revenge, he realized, hadn't been about hurting his mother back. It had been about reclaiming control, proving to himself that he could draw a line and stand on his own side of it. The satisfaction hadn't come from watching her struggle. It came from knowing he no longer owed her his peace. He thought of Clara and Greg often, the two people who had stayed steady when everything else fell apart. Their quiet support had kept him grounded, reminding him that kindness didn't have to come with strings attached. They had shown him that not all loyalty ends in loss. That realization helped soften the bitterness that had once consumed him. He began to understand that growth often comes from the very pain we wish we could avoid. One evening, after finishing work, Ethan took a long drive through his old neighborhood. The sky was soft and golden, the kind of light that makes everything look gentler than it is. As he turned onto the familiar street, he saw the house he had worked so hard to save. The house that had once felt like both a burden and a symbol of love. The yard was quiet, the windows dim. It no longer looked like home to him, just a building made of choices and consequences. He parked for a moment, watching the breeze move through the trees, and thought about how much of his life he had poured into that place. Then he smiled faintly, a mix of sadness and strength in his expression. He wasn't angry anymore. The pain was still there, but it didn't control him. It had turned into something else, understanding, maybe even peace. As he started the car again and pulled away, he didn't look back. The road ahead was open, lined with possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to see before. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like the story was truly his, and that was enough.